Hey, it's week 5. Welcome to Cenozoic Tectonics. Man, we're getting there. We're just about running out of topics to talk about as far as background material. So next week we'll start looking at the specific geology of the places we're going to visit around the West. So anyway, let's get going. Cenozoic Tectonics. This picture is a classic shot looking west from western Nevada into eastern California, showing you the various mountain ranges and valleys that are so typical of basin and range topography. All of this formed by sort of dipping normal faults, rotating and offsetting the Earth's surface. So our objectives this week, we're going to identify the distribution of tectonic plates at the beginning of the Cenozoic. We're going to look at how the margin of Western North America transitions from compression to extension, beginning in about the middle part of the Cenozoic. We'll describe the various or the variety of different Cenozoic structures that we see across the western U.S. Describe the styles and locations of volcanic activity that are associated with these Cenozoic structures. And then finally, it's not a tectonic event, but we're going to mention some of the effects of the Ice Age because, I don't have any other place to talk about it, so this is the place. Okay, so we left our hero at the end of the Mesozoic, and we had a convergent margin running all the way down the west coast of North America at the end of the Mesozoic, right? And we were building this large mountain range along the west coast, subduction zone, volcanoes, fold and thrust belt. And when you look here at the Cretaceous tertiary boundary where the Mesozoic becomes the Cenozoic, the Earth is starting to take on its present form. Sure, India has not yet moved up and hit Asia yet. Africa is not quite all the way filled out in the north. But, things are kind of getting to where they should be. Australia is still attached to Antarctica, so we still got some room for improvement. But it's right here, and I point this out down at the bottom, right? North America is looking pretty good by this point, but something catastrophic is about to happen. And we believe it happened right there. What was it? Ah, run! Oh no! Meteor. So look at all these T-Rexes pissed off, fleeing the advancing meteor. I don't think it helped them. I don't think there's any doubt that a meteor whacked our planet. What's the evidence for that? Well, there's this iridium layer that's sort of sandwiched in there between the Cretaceous tertiary boundary. And of course, where'd that come from? They believe this meteorite brought it with them, and then of course the dust cloud that encircles the planet settles out and you get this layer of iridium everywhere. Is that the only potential way to wipe out the dinosaurs? No, no, no. Oh, uh-oh, look, here's more dead dinosaurs. And what we got going on in the background there is very effusive volcanic activity. So a little bit before the end of the Cretaceous, you have some very large outpourings of basalt in India. This is what's allowing India to separate from Asia there. Anyway, there's controversy going on whether this did it or that did it, but maybe they both did it or they helped. This was maybe, had them on the back foot, and so to speak, and the meteor finished them off. But anyway, dead dinosaurs are the result. So to remind you where we are in our time scale, right? We've moved all the way up here to the upper part of the Mesozoic at the what? Caneozoic? I must have stolen this from some other language. Anyway, into the Mesozoic, into the Cenozoic, and the Cenozoic periods are the tertiary, right, and the quaternary. We're going to improve on that in just a second. Anyway, it's right here, right, where my black arrow has been moved, to the end of the Cretaceous at about 66 million years ago, and of course the extinction of the dinosaurs. Remember, I say at the end of the Cretaceous, not only the dinosaurs, but 50% of all life perished, meaning we don't see it advance into the tertiary. And, for whatever caused it, it was a big deal. But this allows the pesky reptiles to move over and make way for the, what were they? Right? What the heck are we? Reptiles, mammals. Mammals, yeah, that's us, right? Humans evolving. Okay, great. So let's take a look at the Cenozoic. And of course, it's part of the Phanerozoic. That's everything since the Precambrian. It's the era of the Cenozoic. The periods, we can take the tertiary and quaternary. The tertiary can be broken into the Paleogene and the Neogene. Look at all these boundaries. Whew. Of course, why does this happen in the time scale? It's because as rocks get younger, we get more details, and so we can break them up more. And remember, all of this is done based on plants and animals. So then we finally get our epochs of the Cenozoic: Paleocene, Eocene, Oligocene, Miocene, Pliocene, Pleistocene, and Holocene. And then here are the million years ago that they start. So the Holocene started 10,000 years ago at the end of the Ice Age. Ice Age, more or less 2 million years ago, right? Start of the Pleistocene. And I mentioned down here all of the scenes here of the epochs, right, refer to how much life we still see today. I didn't know that. I never really paid attention to where these came from, but I found this, and it says that if you go back, paleo means ancient, of course. Eos from Eocene means the dawn, so the dawn of life in the Cenozoic, so to speak. Oligos is a few. Meon from the Miocene is less. Pleon more, and Plice most. So, yeah, there's something for you to forget. All right, so remember at the end of the Mesozoic, there was a large compressional mountain belt running down the length of North America. This resulted in a series of orogenic zones that were distributed across the West. Well, and really still are. They're just chopped up from the Cenozoic. So anyway, all of these earlier zones are going to get disrupted. Either they're going to be cut by strike-slip faults, or they're going to be chopped up by normal faults, buried by volcanic activity. But anyway, here they are, right? Coast ranges in California, you see the subduction complex. Sierra Nevada mountains represent the batholiths, and of course there were volcanic arc there too. Nevada, pretty much we go across Nevada, we see this thrust belt, and then the western part of Utah, eastern part of Nevada, you see this foreland basin with all of those beautiful thick sediments that were depositing during that time frame. Anyway, we're going to see, well, the Colorado Plateau's over here, and it doesn't get chopped up, but everything to the west does. So when we advance into the Eocene, notice the continents are looking pretty good here. Yeah. So India is not yet mashed into Asia, so no Himalayas yet, but things are getting there. Australia has now separated from Antarctica, so we can build our kangaroos and such. But it looks pretty damn good for 50 million years ago. Half of the present ocean crust of the planet today, right, has formed since the beginning of the Cenozoic. So it's not that things haven't been going on. But you wouldn't see a lot of difference over here in Western North America. What's funny is at the end of the end of the Mesozoic, we see that big orogeny, right? The Sevier orogeny and then the Laramide. And not a lot goes on in the early part of the Cenozoic. It just sort of sits there. Now, one more thing to mention, and this is something that if you work in the West, and you think about volcanic activity or where plutons are coming from or how structure affects rocks, you have to remember that all of the westernmost part of North America is made up of these different terrains. So everything in green and yellow here are materials that came in and got stuck onto the continent, mostly during the Mesozoic, maybe some as early as the later part of the Paleozoic. So, of course, all of Alaska, but then as you come down the west part of Canada and into North America, all of this material right, was abducted and sutured on. Then these darker rocks here, right, the pink rocks over here, right, this is the old basement of North America. This is where you'll find the Precambrian basement that we see in places like the Grand Canyon or even around Las Vegas. Okay, so now here's where the fun starts to happen in the Miocene. Not necessarily the middle Miocene, but we're going to see stuff going back as far as, let's say, between 20 and 30 million years. But sometime in the Miocene, and this is the good as I could do, look, the planet's looking really good, right? It all looks pretty normal. And the Farallon plate, not seen in this exactly, but that Farallon plate is about to be subducted. And once it gets subducted, there's no way to keep the squeezing going on along the sections of the west coast. So this is where we're first going to start to see the development of these different Cenozoic structures across western North America. So let's remind ourselves what's going on here. So at about 30 million years ago, the Farallon plate is the plate that is subducting all along the western margin of North America. Then, because the spreading center is offset by a transform fault, this section of this spreading center is going to hit North America first. And when it does, this section, right, we're seeing partly it's been subducted now. So this part is no longer a compressional boundary, but it's a strike-slip boundary. And as that widens, as more and more of that plate gets subducted, this boundary is going to widen further and further, totally changing the look of western North America. So I showed you this diagram, back in, I don't know, lecture week 1 or 2. Anyway, we can see that at 30 million years ago, the edge of that spreading center is just touching. And then as we go from 20 to 10 to the present, we see the progressive development and widening of the San Andreas segment, right? And of course, we still have subduction up here with the Juan de Fuca plate making the Cascades, and down here with the Riviera plate making the volcanoes in Mexico. Another view of the same thing, right? This time looking with north up, south down, and we see the edge of that plate coming in just about 30 million years ago, and then the development of the San Andreas Fault. And the thing you have to understand is as this zone widens, so is the region of western North America that's going to be really feeling the pulling apart more. So now I'm going to attempt to go all multimedia on you guys, so hang on. I found a small movie that helps to show this. Ooh, you ready? All right, let's watch. So here it goes. About 30 million years ago, we're coming up on that time frame, and then that plate gets subducted, and now look what happens. We begin to widen the San Andreas zone, and look what's going to happen to California and Nevada during this time. Woo! Look at that, right? Did you catch it? All right, well, let's go back here. See the magic of this. I can move this backward. So look, move this back, and you see what happens there. Look at Nevada, all right? So Nevada and California right here, we're going to get big changes. Look, all of a sudden thin, wide, thin, wide, thin, wide. There's your Cenozoic extension, right? As the western North America can move apart because we're making room by the translation along the San Andreas Fault. Pretty slick, huh? Okay, there we go. Man, with that Cenozoic extension comes the volcanic activity and all of the faulting. Woohoo, pretty cool, huh? All right. So, once the western U.S. begins to pull apart, we see the familiar basin and range topography form where there used to be a fold and thrust belt. So, normal faults are going to cut down and offset older Mesozoic folds and thrust faults. So what I've drawn in here for you in this first big circle is more or less the basin and range proper. and this black arrows show the direction of extension. And so we're going to see a whole bunch of normal faults when we cruise across this area with mountain ranges and valleys all trending north, north, northeast. Here, and I couldn't make my circle go sideways in PowerPoint, so you just have to live with it. This is an area, so when we have the Sierra Nevada mountain range here, and we have the Basin and Range here, there is some translation going on in a zone between the Basin and Range and the Sierra Nevada. If you go back and look, if you remember that little animation, it doesn't just pull apart, it sort of pulls and slides to the side. And what we get is right lateral offset along this zone. So we're going to see a combination of right lateral strike slip faults and normal faults. And that creates some pretty amazing basins. First of all, the Death Valley is in there, and that's what's going on in Death Valley today, is a combination of strike slipping and normal faulting. We're also going to see up and down the Walker Lane, because of the volcanic activity and the particular way that things were pulling apart, there's a lot of gold mineralization. So that's very popular. And way over in here, we're going to see Long Valley caldera. That's one of those modern large caldera systems in the west. So all of that is along this sort of strike slipping zone that borders the Sierra Nevada and the Basin and Range. Here's a diagram I showed you back at the beginning of the class, and this is from our structure textbook, again showing the locations of many of these large normal faults running along the main part of the Basin and Range, ending up over here by the Colorado Plateau. And again, some of these large normal faults down in this area are the ones that actually cut into the Grand Canyon, the western Grand Canyon region, and we'll visit those. And this is the site I'll show you in a few slides of some good volcanism. Anyway, down here, this is Las Vegas right here, and we see some strike slip faults both going to the northeast and going to the northwest. And here's that Walker Lane region with Death Valley, and then this area is the one that has the gold mineralization as well as Long Valley today. So during the Miocene, the crust was extended, and when you pull the crust apart, just like pulling anything apart, it's going to get thinner as it gets wider. And as it gets thinner, the mantle is allowed to upwell, move up, right? And when it does that, it melts. So the melting is the result of mantle being moved up. We call that decompression melting. And it's a lot of melting at first. We get so much extension and so much upwelling that there's really a lot of volcanic activity. And the volcanic activity that is widespread across the Basin and Range starting after 30 million years is highly explosive, huge ash flow explosions that are widespread across the region. So this graphic shows the locations of these silicic volcanic centers ranging in age from somewhere in the Miocene 25 down to about 15 million years ago. And if you look, this isn't Colorado, this is Utah, right? This is the Colorado Plateau. We see over here, north of St. George, we're going to see lots and lots of caldera systems. And as we drive across Nevada, north of Tonopah here, all of this area, right, is buried in ash flow tufts starting in the Miocene. Actually, some of them go back even a little bit older. There's the town of Austin, Nevada. A lot of this is gold mineralization is associated too. This young volcanism not only creates huge ash flow tufts, but there's the heat source for a lot of gold mineralization. So we're going to see this whole region of the Basin and Range buried, deeply buried in ash flow tufts. So those Mesozoic rocks that are faulted are going to be then buried by ash flow tufts in the Cenozoic. One of the great places to go see this kind of stuff, right? All of this region here, all of this region there we go. All of this region has ash flow tufts. But the region I point out up here, this is the revelry range. And I mentioned this in the first thing. If we, for a scale, this is Mono Lake over in California. This is the California Nevada boundary right there. So anyway, that's the Reveille Range. And if we go to the Reveille Range, it's very typical of any range or any region here in this part of the world. So when I zoom in on the Reveille Range, what we're going to see is these older Miocene ash flow tufts. And these tufts are very thick, thousands really of feet thick in this part of the world, not just from one eruption, but from multiple eruptions, either here in the range or in the surrounding areas that then buried this area as well. Now, this black scabby looking stuff, these are the younger Pliocene and Pleistocene basalts which cover the ash flow tufts. This is a playa, right? A dry lake bed. So if we zoom in and we look at a photograph of the Reveille Range, and here's a UAA group camping in the foreground, we see that I put this dashed line in here. Above this line, this is all basaltic activity, right? About 4 million years old and younger. So these are lava flows, basaltic lava flows, much like you would see in a place like Hawaii. Below this line, all of this pink rock, everything that we're staying on here, camping on, is all the ash flow tufts, 25 million years old and younger ash flow tufts. So this area was buried deeply with ash flows as part of that, what we called the ignimbrite flare-up. Ignimbrites are ash flow tufts. And this part of Nevada was really, really covered in them because of that Cenozoic extension. Well, about 6 million years ago, volcanism around the West changed. So we don't see almost any more of that really explosive silicic type volcanism. In fact, one of the places we do see that is where we're going to visit the area of Long Valley over in California. So what's going on after about 6 million years? Well, what we pretty much see is basaltic volcanism. And basaltic volcanism, most of it is limited to the edges of the Basin and Range. And one of the places you can really see that well is along the edges of the Basin and Range where it meets the Colorado Plateau here in Arizona and in Utah. So the area that I've circled here is in Arizona, well actually southern Utah and Arizona, and this is an area that we will visit where these lava flows are right on the rim, right, of the Grand Canyon. Other places you might have visited that are similar are the San Francisco peaks and the volcanic fields around Flagstaff, and then there's some areas in Colorado and New Mexico. So when we zoom in on the area north of the Grand Canyon, these red lines in here are those large normal faults I pointed out earlier to you, and they come down here. This is the Colorado River, and this is the Grand Canyon right here. Not so easy to see, but the black areas, the black areas are the lava flows, and that's just not one lava flow, that's multiple cinder cones and lava flows making up these volcanic fields. These have funny names. This is called the Uinkaret field, and this is the Shivwitz. Anyway, there's hundreds of cinder cones and small lava flows that make up this area. And this is new, this is modern, right? This stuff is younger than 6 million years, which is pretty recent if you're a geologist. So what's that look like on the ground? Well, sitting on those cliffs at Toroweep, you can look across. Now we're looking west. And this is one of those large normal faults. This canyon is one of the large normal faults. This block has dropped down compared to the block on this side. And there's a cinder cone sitting right on that block, pouring lavas into the canyon. These are all lavas that have poured into the Grand Canyon. So this is young volcanic activity, younger than 6 million years, and very, very, very widespread in this part of the world. So now we've covered faulting, we've covered volcanic activity, and really the final thing to cover for this part of the world before we get busy looking at each individual area is, like I said, not really a tectonic event, but an event that had lots of effects, and that is the last ice age. Now the last ice age begins about 2 million years ago, right? That's the start of the Pleistocene. And the diagram I've put in here shows the extent, more or less, of the ice sheets. And again, when you remember Alaska here, we have the Bering Land Bridge, right? Which is kind of ironic because Alaska is not covered with ice during the Ice Age. We have ice up in the Brooks Range. We certainly have lots of ice in the Chugach, but the central part of Alaska down there along through Fairbanks is ice-free, which is the way we feel that humans migrated in from Asia and of course North American species migrated out of North America. When we come to the south, the ice had a maximum extent down into Washington, Idaho here, and scattered ice fields in more in higher regions, like certainly around like Telluride in Colorado and the Sierra Nevada. But for the most part, the areas down here in the southwestern part of the U.S. were ice-free. So what kinds of effects did the Ice Age have on that part of the world? Well, it was pretty extreme because we didn't have ice, but there was a heck of a lot of moisture. So there was a lot of lakes. And it turns out that the Cenozoic extension creating that basin and range topography created a lot of areas to store a lot of water. So what we're going to see, and this cartoon was nice because it sort of showed where the ice was up in the northern states and where lakes were down here in the southern part. Anyway, we see some huge lakes, right? Now the Great Salt Lake is just a little sort of dried up puddle, what's left over from this large Lake Bonneville. And there was another lake just as big called Pyramid Lake over in the western side of Nevada. We're going to see lots of effects of this. So here's a little more accurate map showing some of the pluvial lakes. These are the Pleistocene lakes, right? And what we can see is, of course, the huge area in Utah covered with water that's now dried up to just be the Great Salt Lake. But all of these basins across Nevada, right, full of water at times. When we come down into California, even to the areas west of Los Angeles, we see large, large lakes interconnected down in there. And I got another diagram that'll show this area close up. So the area, there's Las Vegas. Las Vegas didn't have large lakes in the Ice Age because it was connected to the Colorado River, so it was drained well. But some of these large basins of the Great Basin, this is Owens River and Owens River Valley, and there's Owens Lake. That we're going to see that over by Lone Pine, California. But this is Death Valley right here, full of water, right, called Lake Manly. Panamint Valley full of water, Panamint Lake, and various lakes, again, around the Mojave region. So lots of evidence of this today. One such place we won't visit, unfortunately, but this is the Black Rock Desert over in western Nevada, and this is the famous site. What you're seeing there is the Burning Man Festival, right? And of course, where are they? They're camped out on this Pleistocene lake bed. Okay, well, we've pretty much done it, right? We've talked about the Basin and Range. We've talked about Basin and Range. We've talked about the Colorado Plateau, right? We've talked about the various paleogeography at different times. We've talked about Mesozoic tectonics. We've talked about Cenozoic tectonics. And so we've kind of got our background ready to go. So now we can cruise around and talk specifically about certain areas. So next week, Vegas, baby. We'll talk about the Las Vegas area and all the what it's got to offer us geologically, and of course everything from Precambrian rocks to the recent, basically bits and pieces of everything we've talked about so far. So I'll see you next week, and yeah, have fun.